Hello, and welcome to Simply Human YouTube channel and podcast. Good morning, Karen, or good afternoon where you are.
Hey, Christina. So this is part 2. I'm so excited to do part 2 of this.
Yeah, today we are closing the loop on dealing with passive-aggressive behaviors, with what I like to call passive-aggressive jujitsu. And if you didn't see last week's episode on just starting to understand what passive aggressive behavior is, like what does it look like, what happens in the dynamic, we'll put a link down in the show note, and we encourage you to watch that first and then come back and watch this episode.
I think it's really important as well, because I think we have some definition of passive aggressive, or in our mind, we think we know what it is. And I loved how we were to explore it much more deeply than my own definition. So I loved it because I learned a lot too. And so I think it was well worth the time. I made some assumptions about a passive aggressive person. And then I was like, oh. So I think it's really important. If you can look for the first one, it would be very helpful.
Yeah, I agree.
Before we actually get into the strategies, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to our YouTube channel, share, and hit the notification button so you know when our new episodes are being posted. And for those on the podcast, text us and tell us your comments and questions, because you can do comments and questions in both YouTube and the podcast. So, Christina, this is what I love the word when you use jiu-jitsu. And so tell us a little bit about what is jiu-jitsu to start with. Why did you use that word? Like why did you use that word? What does it mean?
Okay, so the word is jujitsu.
Okay, obviously. I'm not going to say it, guys, because I'm going to say it wrong. So go ahead.
Jiu-jitsu is a Japanese martial art, and it basically translates into yielding art, where the first core principle is to manipulate the opponent's force against themselves rather than confronting with one's own force. Now, I studied Aikido and Hapkido, which have some similar techniques, except that they also have more offensive strategies where you're taking your force and moving it forward. But because of passive-aggressive dynamic and its ability to evoke aggression in another person and then kind of send you into not effective behaviors, jujitsu, or thinking of that jujitsu frame where you're actually taking what is the other person's unexpressed or repressed negative feelings and anger, and you're kind of boomeranging it back to them. So they're the ones sitting and holding and having to be present to it, instead of you having that anger and resentment and rage in your own body. So your brain doesn't even know what's going on. And you'll see me do this hand movement a lot. And that's like taking this energy and redirecting it back towards the other person. Does that make sense, Karen?
Yes, and I love it because it is like the boomerang. Because in actuality, you're letting it go back to them instead of like taking it in and then throwing it back to them. You're actually just redirecting it back to them to like. Yes. I love that.
Yeah, it really relies on this gentle boomerang approach.
Yeah.
And it redirecting. And I remember reading an article about jiu-jitsu and how it's the martial art where the opponent just ends up having to surrender out of frustration.
I love it.
Because you're just able to dodge that monkey poo. It's sort of another version of the art of dodging monkey poo. And not taking chum, because you're not letting it stick to you. You're not letting it get inside of you. You're recognizing that energy, which is in those behaviors, which is why we're redirecting you back to the part 1 of the passive aggressive episodes. You recognize it and you know, oh, okay, I need to not have my Velcro suit on, and I need to redirect back to the other person so I can be clear-minded. I can be in my curiosity, my compassion, my empathy, and my healthy boundaries. And we're going to go over everything that you need to know to be in the state of mind so that you can deal with passive aggressive behavior. And I just want to remind everybody real quick, when we're talking about passive aggressive behaviors, we're talking about things like, I call it passive aggressive amnesia, forgetting, where the person feigns like, oh, I don't remember you asking me to do that. Really? When did we have that conversation? And it's just infuriating. because you feel it. You'll feel infuriating. What did you mean you forgot? We just had this conversation like 2 hours ago. Willful procrastination. So we're not talking about the normal procrastination that people might struggle with because maybe they have ADHD or they're pressure prompted personality types. This is, I don't want to do this thing and I'm resentful that I have to do it, and I'll just put it at the bottom of my list. And so it's an intentional procrastination. It's tone that doesn't match the words. In the other episode, we showed these clips of someone giving backhanded compliments. So they're smiling and it sounds like they're giving a compliment, but actually it's an insult and it's not matching. Or it's poor follow through that causes other people to feel that they're having to take on this responsibility and they don't know why, and they start to feel angry inside themselves. Through the dynamic, if you remember, one person's passive approach to dealing with their anger or negative emotions, like they want to convey it, but they do it in these subtle, passive ways. But what happens to the other person is that the other person ends up feeling the anger or guilt or negative emotions when they weren't feeling it maybe 5 minutes before they encountered this person. It's just suddenly they're seething with anger. So does that tie it all back for you, Karen?
Yeah. So I just have to, like, for those people who didn't see the last one, just like if you've ever watched Everybody Loves Raymond, and the mother-in-law to Deborah is a perfect example of it, when she's always giving these passive aggressive knocks at her.
But her tone is
I know.
always nice.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I just had to bring that back because I think that really epitomized when you're talking about. That's exactly what we're talking about. They're trying to be nice, but they're actually was trying to whap you, right? So,
right.
and Christina wants to just whap them back. Is really what you want.
Right. I do. So I did this training on passive aggressiveness with these therapists.
Yeah.
And the opposite term of the spectrum that these trainers used was there's passive aggressive to expressive aggressive. So those of us who are comfortable with conflict, we're comfortable letting people know if I'm mad or, hey, that's pissed me off. I keep referring that to as expressive aggressive. And I'm not talking about people who just go and yell and rant, although those are folks on the expressive aggressive side, but it's a spectrum. So there's a healthy range of expressive aggressive that is just this comfort with confrontation. Okay, so what do we do instead of getting mad and frustrated? And we're going to go over strategies for dealing with passive aggressive behavior. First thing is recognizing the signs. And this can be tricky because passive aggressive, it says it in the name, it's passive behavior, it's subtle behavior, it's not overt, it's covert behavior. But here are some things to look for. One, after an interaction with someone, you feel a little bit confused and suddenly angry, but you weren't a few minutes before you interacted with that person. What just happened? I call that the passive aggressive drive-by. Like, wait, what just happened? You find yourself frequently feeling angry at a particular person when you don't normally feel angry around people. You're just not normally pissed off all the time, but this one person just evokes this anger out of you. I had a really passive aggressive boss, and you would just know when someone got one of her emails because you would suddenly hear doors slamming and that B word, or, she would just evoke so much anger. And these were really very kind, loving, compassionate people in the mental health field. It wasn't normal for them to be reacting that way. And I'd be in my office like, ooh, someone got a PA email. I don't know. This is something that would be cool for you to notice because you work in corporate environments, is to start trying to notice. You're on the East Coast. So like I said last time, the culture is a little bit different. The culture leans a little bit more expressive. So I don't recall seeing a ton of passive aggressiveness. There was just a couple of incidents, to be honest with you, my entire 11 years. I can only name 2 times I came across passive aggressive behavior. I'm sure there's more, and I'm sure it depends on the environment. I was a defense contractor, so it just didn't occur very much in that environment.
Well, I also think because of the type of person I am, sometimes I just didn't understand what they're talking about. So I just shrug and just move on. Because I want to avoid conflict. So I'm just like, oh, whatever. So I think this is the whole point of the sharing this, because I think it's the awareness and to not avoid it, but to actually address it in a way that is so much more healthier for you and that person as well. So why don't you continue on what are some of the other signs?
Like silent treatment, or noticing that a person is intentionally withholding important information or resources. If you're in a relationship and the person is intentionally withholding emotional support to create difficulties for others while maintaining plausible deniability. So they'll be like, I don't really know what you're talking about. I mean, I was just over here sitting. There'll be this.
But even in the corporation, I hear that sometimes, especially when people are trying to do change and we think that everybody agrees in the meeting that we're going to do this change and they're for it. But then all of a sudden they have amnesia when they go back to their team, and in their brain they're saying, I'm not going to do it anyways. That's kind of a passive aggressive behavior where in the you're pretending you're doing it, but you actually aren't. But in a lot of time, even in leadership teams and teams, sometimes we hold back information. That's passive aggressive because you want that person to fail subconsciously, possibly, or something. So that I think happens sometimes.
Karen, if it's for that reason, because you're actually trying to sabotage.
That's what I mean. Exactly. Because you're trying to sabotage.
Sometimes leaders hold back information because there's some political timing, or
that's different, right? But I meant like you actually want them to fail. Exactly.
Yes, sabotaging behavior. I remember working on a project where it was, like you said, changed. It was information technology. It was a brand new system, and there was a ton of resistance. And what happened was the employees took the new system, turned off everything that was new, so that basically the new system only functioned like the old system.
Wow, that's definitely passive aggressive. Wow.
They're just like, I'm not going to learn it. I'm not going to even look in. I'm not even going to try it. I'm just going to only do the things I used to do, and you can't make me. And this is a key thing about passive aggressive behavior, to recognize it. It is about exercising power, but it's exercising power and control in a passive way. Not everything, like sarcasm, isn't always passive aggressive. One, it arises when it's trying to undercut, when it's trying to exercise power in that passive way by sabotaging. Then we're dealing more with passive aggressive sarcasm than your normal, I just have a sarcastic sense of humor.
And this is an important distinction, guys, that she's talking about, because there are sarcastic people that are just naturally a trait that they have. So don't think they're passive aggressive.
You're really looking for that subtle sabotage, deliberately making mistakes or neglecting important details as a way to undermine the project. Or maybe what you're trying to do is, well, I'll just do a half-assed job, and then, I won't have to do it. Now, couples will be real familiar with this, as I hear this a lot, where there's a complaint about, my spouse is supposed to do the dishes, but they do such a crappy job. I just get so frustrated, I just end up doing it.
That's my husband who says that. I'm not allowed to do the dishes anymore.
Well, yeah, but are you doing a half-assed job because you don't want to, or is it because you have ADD and you just don't want to the details?
This is the whole point, because what I think is passive aggressive isn't necessarily, it's just because I am who I am, because it's not intentionally doing. The intention is really, really important here.
Yeah, the intention. Now, sometimes it's unconscious, and so you're really looking at those issues of power and control. So just the last couple are agreeing to do something, but then expressing resentment through body language, like eye rolling, fine, tone of voice, and then heavy sighing. Yeah. Something I do, I call it passive aggressive doodling. So in staff meetings, I doodle because I'm a visual processor. So to help my processing of auditory information, I doodle, because just seeing something visual helps me process. But it becomes passive aggressive doodling when I start like doodling really loudly.
Do you really?
doodling really obviously. And yeah, I had a supervisor get really mad at me for that, but the presenter was so horrible and I was just getting so mad, and all I could do was like passive aggressively doodle. So let's talk about, so what do? We're noticing all of these signs. What are the steps to start getting our own composure and then being able to deal with it effectively?
So this goes back to what we always talk about. When you feel it in your body, because you're recognizing these signs and you can feel it because your body will start to show the discomfort. And so the idea is stay calm, compose, and stop reacting. Like, don't react impulsively and just take that moment. If you go into it and you engage and you accuse that person of acting passive aggressive, because now you know what it is, it's just going to prompt more of it. What are you talking about?
The amnesia, the
Well, just like,
denial.
I didn't say that, that denial.
You're being so mean.
Right. So again, this is what we're just trying to have, that unclenching and then taking that breath, or doing this, or even just like bringing your hand, bring you to the present moment so you're not reacting. And silence is okay. You don't have to respond right quickly. Just take it in. And you start to see it as just information. Just the whole point of be curious. I'm learning now, as I've told you guys over and over, and I think it's important. What is the key skill that we talk a lot about was about staying calm and just to be curious. And curiosity allows you to just see that as more information about what's the situation in this moment. And then when you're able to do that, you can generate a curiosity about what's really going on. Because in essence, you want to focus on your positive intention. You want to focus on your own goodwill and kindness and positive intent instead of getting wrapped up into it, like we're just saying. And I love this
because passive aggressiveness, remember, someone else puts their anger inside of you.
Right.
So if you can reorient to your own sense of compassion and empathy, get back to yourself, basically.
Yeah. Because actually, when they're doing it, they're projecting. It's their anger. It's more about them than you. And that's what you need to explore, that information. And that's what we mean by staying calm and composed and bringing in curiosity.
Okay, and then once you get your body calm, because honestly, it's so important. That first step, you write it down. You cannot do any of the other steps if you haven't calmed down your body, because your thinking brain is partially offline when you're reacting, and you have to get back into that prefrontal cortex thinking brain. So you have to do number one. And if you were going to practice any of these, practice that one that Karen just talked about. And then the second step is you have to then reestablish your boundaries, because passive aggressiveness will feel like your boundaries are being disrespected, or passive aggressive ways of behaving often is about trying to move through or beyond someone's boundaries. So you have to next focus on get grounded and then re-identify. Let's go over boundaries again. What is okay and not okay? Identify what's in your control and identify what actions you're willing to take.
Mm-hmm.
So for yourself, it might be that what's okay, what's not okay. It's not okay to lash out, because passive aggressiveness will evoke either anger, or often it'll evoke guilt, and you start doing something like making the bed when you didn't really want to make the bed. You start engaging that because you feel guilty or you feel angry. So you have to first be clear on boundaries for yourself. What's okay and not okay for me to do? It's going to be in your control because it's about you. And then what actions are you willing to take? And that might be confront. You also would benefit from, when you start getting better at this, when you start seeing the monkey poo, if you could cultivate amusement towards this kind of behavior. So if we go back to understanding the drivers of passive aggressive behavior, and some of them are things that come from their childhood of having not felt safe, like these are just adaptations to the world. So if you can get beyond the fury and be like, oh, okay, I know what you're doing, and ooh, being passive aggressive today, just having kind of an amused attitude, because really anytime you can get more grounded in the positive emotions, the passive aggressiveness won't be working on you. Because the whole point is to dump the negativity into you.
Yeah. And so when she says monkey poo is actually that projectile that's coming at you. That's all about them.
We'll put a link to that episode on dodging monkey poo and avoiding chum, because it really goes hand in hand with dealing
funny.
with people.
Your stories about that is funny. It's Christina's words. It's really, really creative.
So, and then finally, for the person, be clear in terms of boundaries when you're having, boundaries for yourself, and then cultivating humor, and then be clear on what boundaries you need to have with the other person. And that's going to be really heavily oriented on the third leg of the boundary stool, which is what actions you're willing to take. What are the consequences of their behavior you have some power over and you can implement?
After you set boundaries, focus on the facts. So, as we all know, facts are really important, and it gives you a way to ground yourself, but it's very easy to go into assumptions. They make assumptions, you make assumptions, and assumptions are based on we just take in all this data and then we make assumptions or stories about what's really happening. If you can detangle from the story that's in front of you and really just focus on the facts. So this is particularly effective when you have a passive aggressive boss who makes assumptions or uses insinuations and other passive forms of accusation. And what we mean by focusing on the facts is looking at the content and not the delivery. You look with curiosity and you also assume a genuine concern. And what's really powerful about this is the more you can practice this by focusing on what really did happen versus what I think may have happened, it really begins to set a different tone about what's going on. So what we ask you to do is, after you're able to do this with focusing on the facts and not letting your stories get into the way, or their stories about getting in the way, or the emotions. What's really cool is using advocacy with inquiry strategies. And we do have a past episode on that. And what it allows you to do is to bring to light exactly what the person is actually interested in, what's going, like, what is it they're boomeranging to you or throwing this projectile? What is their anger really, really about? What is that projectile or that monkey poo all about? And what I like about it primarily is it's only two parts. Advocacy is sharing your own assumptions and thinking and process and reasoning to make it transparent on what's going on here. What are you noticing? So simple statements like, let me understand something. When you said that, what do you really mean? It's just curiosity questions. Any questions is good as long as you are really doing it with positive intention and curiosity, not just saying things just to say, oh, like you're asking a question and then it's a genuine question. Right. And I remember one of the things that we said, if it's not a genuine question, because you could end it with, you stupid head. And then that means it's not a genuine question. So that's what you're trying to do, is really go into the facts, because you're letting them focus on, this is what I saw. This is what I heard. What's happening here?
I have an example.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. So I had a really passive aggressive boss, and she was known for her passive aggressive emails, and they would be filled with these accusations or insinuations. Emails don't have tone, but because there would be these insinuations, you just kind of sense this tone out of it. This is why I told you I would hear doors slamming and people getting really triggered. But I knew that this is her style. She had a very passive aggressive approach to leadership. And so my response would always be using this. Well, I'm curious about what assumptions informed that conclusion. So I would call her insinuation a conclusion. And I would say, I'm curious about what facts informed your conclusion. Here are the facts I'm operating from: A, B, C, D. Can you help me understand, where's the disconnect? So I'm sticking to facts. I'm asking her to actually put her facts forward. This is so critical to dealing with passive aggressiveness. You stay in the facts, because the facts doesn't have all of that sticky, emotional, subtext that is what makes you so aggravated. You go into facts which are neutral emotionally. Here's the facts. And by saying, here's my facts, what are your facts? They don't want to be held. I'll be honest with you. they don't want to be explicit. That's why this is so effective, is they want to be covert. So when you're right up front and you're saying, tell me your facts, I would never get a response back again. I'd be left alone for a while till the next time I got one. It was incredibly effective.
And that's the whole point of the advocacy with inquiry, because in one sentence, you're doing both, because you're sharing your facts and then you're asking them, so is there any other facts you want to add to this? Or how did you see it? Or where are you coming from? Because again, that inquiry is trying to figure out with curiosity and exploring that information that you originally got. That's finding out more about where they're at, what led them to say or do what they're doing that created that ugliness within them, right?
Yeah, and why this is so effective when say you're dealing with a boss as opposed to you're dealing with a subordinate is because of the power dynamic. So you can't use some like the strategy I'm going to go into next. You probably couldn't entirely do with someone who's above you, whether there's a power dynamic. But by doing the one Karen's talking about, the advocacy with inquiry, with genuine curiosity, and let me assume there's something legitimate. Let me assume there's something they're not happy about, but maybe they're conflict avoiding and it's coming out sideways. So I'm going to bring us to the land of facts where it can feel safer and invite them into a more honest conversation. There's nothing insubordinate about doing that. So you can actually do that when you are trying to do it with somebody who has power over you.
So
now we're gonna go into the next one.
That's just gonna ask you. Perfect.
Yeah, so I asked Karen to be the one to talk about that advocacy with inquiry because I said, well, you're nicer than me. She does a lot more this collaborative style in the group she works with. And I'm like, I'm not as nice. I tend to use one called strategic inquiry. And this is a strategy you use when you might be the boss and you have a subordinate who's being passive aggressive, or you're in a relationship and you really have been in a pattern of your partner's passive aggressive behavior has just created so much conflict, and there needs to be more of these tougher, harder conversations to see if that person is even able to be accountable, because they may not be. Like, some of this may be unconscious for them, and then you have to decide, is this relationship going to work with me? Because it is very, very hard on the receiving end of it. So what do I mean by strategic inquiry? It's similar to advocacy with inquiry, except when Karen said your inquiry comes from genuine curiosity and you're assuming care, with strategic inquiry, you're really more focused on boomeranging back that accountability. So your inquiry is actually more leading. They're leading questions that are trying to get the person to be more truthful about their negative feelings. So it avoids direct accusation. So you're not telling, like, you have been dragging your feet on purpose and blah, blah, blah. That's just going to evoke more of the victim denial. God, I didn't even know what happened. I don't remember getting that. I don't know why you're talking to me that way. Which just makes the other person be like, how do you not know this? And even more angry. So you don't want to do the telling approach. You're going to do the strategic inquiry. So let me give you some examples. So say you're dealing with someone who has that passive aggressive amnesia, where they're just not doing it and then they're not being honest and they're saying, I forgot. So then you stick to the facts, but a leading question sounds more like, isn't it true that you agreed to do this yesterday? So how should I interpret agreements from you in the future? It's kind of nailing them a little bit to the wall and saying, this again would be a pattern of, you've been making agreements and they don't seem to mean anything. And now you're holding them accountable for this pattern by saying, well, how should I interpret agreements from you in the future? Because basically your yes doesn't mean yes.
Yeah.
So are you willing to let me know when you can't take an assignment? Now I'm opening that invitation door for them to be more honest about saying, I can't do that. My plate's already full. For no follow through, you might say, when you said you would have this done by Friday, walk me through how you saw that happening. So again, I'm getting them to nail down on, you made this agreement. Did you even have a plan? Is your agreement substantiated by anything on your side? Walk me through how you saw that happening. It's a lot of accountability when you ask someone, walk me through how you saw that happening. Insinuation. So as I mentioned in that email with that boss who would insinuate a lot, I say things like, well, what facts are informing your interpretation? So it's inquiry, but I'm taking control of focusing where that inquiry goes, and I want it to go to facts. To deal with avoiding, passive aggressive avoiding. It might sound like you volunteered to be on this project, but you missed the last 2 planning meetings. And this is creating stress for the rest of the team. Those are the consequences. If you're still interested in helping out, and I hope you are, I'd like you to attend the meetings. And if not, I need to know so we can find an alternative solution. So again, that's putting it back in the person that their yes means yes, or their no can be no, but you're telling them you need honesty. This is having an impact, and it's preventing us from taking alternative steps, and I need to know now. So you can see there's a little bit more nailing jello to the wall here. And then nonverbals, again, it might be something like your words say yes, but your eye rolls are saying otherwise. And this is where you would use an amused tone. So help me understand, why are you feeling frustrated right now? Because eye rolling is a passive aggressive sign of frustration, or this is stupid, or judgment. And so rather than getting annoyed yourself, carrying the anger, it's to be able to have some humor and word it in a funny way, and then invite honesty. Because at the core, when you're dealing with passive aggressiveness, because it is such a covert and deceptive defense style, you want to be promoting honesty and open communication and encouraging people to tell the truth and provide reassurance that honesty is going to be rewarded. Honesty is safer than passive aggressive behavior, because particularly with people who learn in childhood that being honest about disagreement is dangerous, you do have to create that environment and reassurance that it's not going to be dangerous, that their continuation of passive aggressive behavior is what's creating conflict. And so you want to invite in that more adaptive behavior.
I love what you just shared because it really focused on accountability, which I feel, especially as leaders and managers, it is a topic that's really hot and heavy, especially in today's environment.
Well, good. That's good to hear. I'm not in the
Because
corporate environment anymore, so I'm happy to hear accountability is
right,
a big topic.
but I think it's sometimes like accountability is sometimes we want people to become more
Mhm.
accountable, but sometimes there's a lot of people who will be passive aggressive because of the stress outness of this environment and the resentment of there's not enough people to do the work and all this other stuff, but there's still the work has to be done. And the way you actually said certain things is saying, let me help you, let me understand why can't you make a decision. If you can't go, then let me know so we can put someone else in there. And I love the way you frame those phrases because it allowed me to boomerang it back in such a way as giving them the choice.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Creating choice is helpful because it does move out of the accusation tone and the
Exactly.
risk of evoking either more passive aggressive denial
Hmm.
or shame response, which could also lead to, more withdrawing. So we're trying to focus on facts, creating a space for open and honest communication that feels safe to everybody,
Hmm.
and where truthfulness becomes a norm. So, what we want you to do is listen to both episodes, both to reflect on your own behavior. Are you someone who is not comfortable with conflict? And so you may be engaging in these behaviors and you haven't realized this is why the people around you are mad all the time, because your perception might be, I'm just always getting yelled at and I don't know why. Well, I think about it. Are you avoiding conflict and then you engage in these behaviors? Or are you someone who's either has employees you supervise, or you have a boss, or you have other people, family members, people in your life who engage in passive aggressive behavior, to understand that it may come from these learned behaviors, childhood trauma, cultural norms. And so a person may not be 100% aware that they're doing it, and use these more effective strategies that are either bringing a more compassionate advocacy with inquiry approach, or you need to be more effective at someone who's really slippery like jello, and you have to get better at nailing jello to the wall with the more strategic inquiry. But the bottom line is to create a space that feels safe for open communication about negative feelings and disagreement, so that truthfulness and honesty is the norm. I hope that this was helpful. It's a very big topic. It's a lot to cover in, less than 2 hours. But if you have any questions about it, just put it in the comments below, or you can email us at simplyhuman.connect@gmail.com, or you can hit the text me button in the podcast.
Well, you know what? I just want to end with a final thought. It's really important that we actually cultivate humor with this, and that we give the ability for us to remain a little bit silent so we don't engage right away. And honestly, that's the best medicine to a passive aggressive energy. And so we encourage you guys to address passive aggressive behavior in your lives. And we have 2 episodes on this, so we hope that you will listen to both. So before we go, don't forget that we would love for you to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, share with other people who you know, because this is a really important topic that we all deal with this in our lives. No one, I think, is immune to this. So we would love for you to share this with your other friends and coworkers, because this is a topic that I would really say that it hits everybody, and understanding both what it is, passive aggressive, and what are the strategies to use when you see or you're involved in a passive aggressive behavior. And we'd love you to share with your friends and colleagues, and hit that notification button so that you'll know when our new episodes are posted. We really look forward to the next time that we speak to you, and have a great week.
See you guys later.
Bye.